And it's a real honor to talk to one of the greats out of Hollywood, Rob Reiner, of course, his father, the great Carl Reiner. What a story you've told throughout your life, through your movies. I wanted to go through some of our favorite scenes from some of your movies, and then just quickly, you could give me a short commentary, what first comes to your mind. So we'll start with the great Stand By Me, the train and bridge scene.
Well, the train and bridge scene was, the boys were never in trouble. The train was hundreds and hundreds of yards behind them. I used a long lens to make it look like the train was on top of them. And the boys, they wouldn't get upset. They wouldn't cry. And I said, boys, you got to think about it. If that train is not going to kill you, I'm going to kill you. I started screaming at them like this. They started crying. And they run down the track and they're crying. And then they jump off the track and they come and they give me a big hug. And they said, we did it, Rob, we did it. And so that was a great moment. They were so trusting of me that they let me get on them a little bit for doing that.
Brilliant. And the great movie Misery, written by Stephen King, the hobbling scene. When you think of that scene, first thing that comes to mind when you were shooting that? You think back on that.
The first thing was, it was originally, she was going to use an axe. And I said, wait a minute. I said, we're going too far here. And also, I want this guy to survive this thing, because he publishes the book at the end, the one he wrote under duress. And in the book, he goes back to writing Misery again. So it was Andy Scheinman, my partner, who came up with the idea of putting the wooden block between the 2 feet. And so that when she hit it with the sledgehammer, the foot would just, like a hinge, it would go. And that's one of the biggest moments. And the audience goes crazy when they see that.
All right, how about the lovely Meg Ryan, of course, one of the most famous scenes of all time, faking the orgasm at the delicatessen, and at the end, your mom saying, I'll have what she's having. I mean, that scene, go through that.
Who now, because of that line, she becomes one of the great of all-time great lines in movie history. I mean, she's right up there with Marlon Brando and Clark Gable, who says, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. Meg had a tough time with that scene because she was in front of everybody, and she did it kind of weak a few times, and then eventually I sat down and I said, Meg, this is the way I want you to do it. And I started screaming, yes, yes, yes. I'm screaming like this. I'm realizing I'm having an orgasm in front of my mother who's standing over there.
Oh, what a great scene. And then on to the Princess Bride, the most passionate and most pure kiss at the very end of The Princess Bride. What comes to mind when I bring up that scene?
Well, it's funny because it didn't until recently. We did a reading of Princess Bride, and the last thing my father and I ever did, I actually played a little boy at the end, and he was the grandfather. And I said, can you come back and read it again tomorrow? And he looked at me and he said, as you wish. And that's the last thing my father ever did on camera before he passed away. So that's what I think about now.
What a great story.
To think about that.
And then moving on to the great scene in the courtroom with Tom Cruise, Jack Nicholson, A Few Good Men, and You Can't Handle the Truth. Take us through that scene. What a great scene in movie history.
Well, Jack, did that performance that you see. Initially, I said, Jack, you got a big, long speech here. Do you want me to shoot you first or shoot the reaction shots? And I said, you can get a chance to rehearse a little bit. He said, let you shoot the reaction shots, and then when you come around and shoot me, I'll be ready to do it. When I shoot the reaction shots of Tom and me and Kevin Bacon and Kevin Pollak, Jack is off camera, and he's giving exactly the same reading and the same performance that you see eventually when he's on camera. And I said, Jack, maybe you should wait and hold a little of that for when I come around and put the camera on you. And he said, Rob, you don't understand. I love to act.
So it was a real pleasure talking with you, Rob. Hopefully get you on down the road, my man.
Thank you so much for having me.